December 4th of the year 771, who here is versed in their early medieval history? This is the day that King Carloman I, son of King Pepin the Short and younger brother of the famous Charlemagne, died at the age of 20, allegedly from a severe nosebleed. Now, sudden and unexpected as this death was, it is accepted by a lot of people that this was truly an accidental death. Be that as it may, this death had big ramifications. You see, Pepin had two sons, the first, Charlemagne. Allegedly, it's not known if this is true, but allegedly he was an illegitimate child, leaving the second son, Carloman. He's not the oldest, so it would be unusual for him to inherit, but he doesn't have any question of his legitimacy. So what Pepin did is he divided his kingdom, gave half to each son, an idea that has never failed in the past. However, now with Carloman dead at age 20, Charlemagne is able to reunite the Frankish Empire and build his legacy as Charlemagne the Great. December 4th, 1110 AD, the Siege of Sidon. This is the day that the city of Sidon, present day in Lebanon, was captured during the First Crusade by the Crusaders Baldwin I and Sigurd the Crusader of Norway. The First Crusade overall was a pretty big success for European Christians, resulting in the securing of Jerusalem and the establishment of several Crusader states. December 4th, 1214 AD, this was the date of death for William the Lion. He was a Scottish king. He was the longest ruling Scottish monarch before the Union of the Crowns, coming in with a 49-year reign. December 4th, 1259, the Treaty of Paris was signed by King Louis IX of France and Henry III of England. Now, to understand this, we have to go back to William the Conqueror 1066, the guy who sailed across the English Channel, conquered the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and unified England into one single kingdom. At the time that he did that, he was Duke of Normandy. Normandy is in France. So for a few hundred years after that, that dynasty had a situation where their land holdings in France were subject to the King of France, but they technically governed them. But then their land holdings in England, they were kings outright. Well, this treaty puts a stop to that. Under this treaty, they give up their claims to Normandy. And in exchange, the French agree to completely stop supporting some rebels in England that had become a problem in the homeland. And December 4th was the day this was signed. December 4th, 1619, 38 colonists arrive at the site of Berkeley Hundred in modern-day Virginia. This is one of the very early American colonies, and the charter of that group proclaims that every year on that date they would have a celebration, specifically a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. December 4th, 1623, on this day, 50 Christians, Catholic missionaries, were executed by being burned alive in the city of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, Japan. Many Asian nations and cultures have a trend of being mistrustful of outside cultural influence, especially outside religious influence. This is not exclusive to Japan. I can find examples from China, Tibet, Nepal, Korea, lots of East Asian places. But Japan is a very notable example of this. In fact, for a long period of time, they closed themselves off as much as they could from the outside world. And so various Christian missionaries being killed or driven out of places in the Far East is not at all uncommon, but this one is noteworthy because so many were killed at one time in such an attention-grabbing way. December 4th, 1676, the Battle of Lund. This was fought between the United Kingdoms of Denmark and Norway. On one side, they were invading the Kingdom of Sweden. Lund being a place in southern Sweden, this was part of the Scanian War. And the thing that stands out about this battle is it is known as one of the bloodiest battles in Scandinavian history. Maybe not in terms of sheer numbers, but in terms of percentages of troop casualties on both sides. The Swedish side started with around 8,000 troops. They lost nearly half of that. And the Danish-Norwegian side had around 13,000 troops. They lost between 8,000 and 9,000 of that. So that is quite a bit more than half. That does, however, include 2,000 captured. So when I think of bloody Scandinavian battles and wars, the Winter War between Finland and the Soviets comes to mind. But although the Winter War carried the risk of suddenly being hit by the White Death, imagine going into a battle and having a 50-50 shot of either being killed or going POW. Yeah, this one was a little brutal. December 4th, 1679, this is the date of death for the famous Thomas Hobbes. He was a philosopher from England. He is known as one of the fathers of modern political science. He is the author of Leviathan. He is one of the great Enlightenment thinkers. He is credited with coming up with social contract theory. And he reached the ripe old age of 91. December 4th, 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie Stuart. He was part of an exiled royal family that had claims to the kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. He led the Second Jacobite Uprising in 1745, known as the 45 in Scotland. He recruited an army of mostly Scotsmen, in an attempt to reclaim his family's throne by leading a Catholic Scottish uprising against the Protestant English. Has anyone else been watching or reading Outlander? If so, you already know the story. Well, on this day, his army reaches a place called Derby that is the furthest south they are destined to go in this uprising. After this, the army will be driven back up north by the English, until they are finally defeated at a place called Culloden. The defeat at Culloden will be once and for all, and the result of this defeat is some of the most repressive and tyrannical laws that Scotland has ever seen. Bonnie Prince Charlie does, however, survive the war and escape Scotland. He lives out the rest of his days in exile on the European. December 4th, 1783, Washington bids farewell to his officers. This was at the close of the American Revolution. When the fighting was done, it was time for everyone to go their separate ways. This happened in the Fraunces Tap Room in New York City. His exact words, "With a heart full of love and gratitude, I now take my leave of you. I devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." End quote, and that is a great way to leave a group of war comrades. December 4, 1786, Mission Santa Barbara is dedicated. This was a missionary location founded by Franciscan monks in what is now Santa Barbara, California, and it was founded on the feast day of Saint Barbara. So if you wonder why some places in the US have San or Santa in their place name, that probably derives from the Spanish or French word for saint, and probably comes from a time where that place was part of the Spanish or French parts of North America. And California, for around 60 years after this, would remain under either Spanish or Mexican control, until the U.S.-Mexican War of the 1840s. That is when the U.S. took a lot of land in the West from Mexico. Not to be confused with the Texan Revolution or the Texas War for Independence, which was a separate conflict in itself. December 4th, 1808, the city of Madrid surrenders to Emperor Napoleon I of France after a 4-day-long siege. He arrived on the place on the 2nd of December, dates matter, that is the anniversary of Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz. Some of the terms of surrender include: French soldiers would not be quartered in monasteries, however they would carry out the policing in the city. All existing officials in the city of Madrid would be allowed to keep their positions, and no religion would be tolerated except the Roman Catholic faith. December 4th, 1828, this is the date of death for Robert Jenkinson. He was the second Earl of Liverpool, also Prime Minister of the UK, his term going from 1812 to 1827. And that term, by the way, included the War of 1812 with the United States and also the Napoleonic Wars. This is the guy who was in office during the Battle of Waterloo and the Battle of New Orleans. Regardless what you think of his politics, he certainly had a tough job to do. December 4th, 1850, that is the date of death for Mr. William Sturgeon. He was an inventor from England. He created the first electromagnet, also the first electric motor. December 4th, 1861. In the context of United States elections, the Electoral College, the year being 1861, I think you know what's coming. The 109 electors of the southern states unanimously declare Jefferson Davis to be President of the Confederate States of America. Now keep in mind, this was after the fighting had already been going on for the better part of a year. Fort Sumter attack happened all the way back in April of that year. Individual states had been declaring themselves independent of the Union left and right, and now they come together as a confederacy, a form of government that places much less power in the federal authority, and in turn gives much more power to the states and to local governments. December 4th, 1863, this is General James Longstreet, and on this day, he lifted the siege of Knoxville, Tennessee during the Civil War. This was part of the Knoxville campaign, and this was done partially in response to the approach of General William T. Sherman, who was in command of a pretty formidable force of Union troops. The Western campaigns of the Civil War often don't get the attention they should. When most people think Civil War, they either think about the battles in Virginia or maybe Sherman's March to Sea. But the campaigns in Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee are pretty fun to read up on. December 4th, 1864, a year to the day from the lifting of the siege at Knoxville. That is the Battle of Waynesboro, Georgia, also involving General Sherman. This was during his famous March to Sea. This was a Union victory over Confederate troops that opened up the way for him to advance further towards the coast. December 4th, 1865, a year to the day after the Battle of Waynesboro, Georgia, North Carolina ratifies the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This was part of a set of 3 amendments that got passed shortly after the Civil War, having to do with the status of blacks and freed slaves in our civic structure. The 13th was the one that prohibited involuntary servitude except as a court-ordered punishment. So, fun fact, prisoners in prison are technically slaves. They can be forced to do labor against their will. Same goes when a judge sentences someone to community service. The more you know. December 4th, 1872, do you like historical mysteries? This is a painting of the ship Mary Celeste. And on this day, she was discovered drifting aimlessly, literally aimlessly, in the Atlantic Ocean. The crew was missing. The cargo that this boat was carrying, alcohol, was undisturbed. All the crew's personal belongings were still there on the boat, undisturbed. One lifeboat was missing, and the crew was never heard from again. So what happened to them? Well, I suppose that's for God and the fishes to know and us to wonder about. December 4th, 1875, this is a picture of New York City politician Boss Tweed. I was hoping that was his real name, but he was actually born William Tweed. At his height, he was the third largest landowner in New York City. He was also vested in banks, railroads, and a number of other profitable ventures. Had a bunch of political scandals related to corruption. Was convicted on over 200 counts of various crimes, mostly relating to that, in 1873. And then on that day, December 4th, 1875, he actually escaped from prison, later to be recaptured in Spain. People in the 19th century lived more eventful lives than we do, for better or worse. December 4th, 1917. This is the day that the Senate of Finland proposes to the Finnish parliament an act that would declare the independence of Finland from Russia. Official Finnish Independence Day, however, is 2 days later. That is when this officially gets ratified. The borders in Eastern Europe, particularly near Russia, are known for going back and forth, loads and loads of times throughout history. Finland is included in this. Imperial Russia, under the Tsars, they had what it took militarily to keep and hold land, compete with some of those strong, famous Western powers in Western Europe. Think of the Crimean War, the Napoleonic Wars, the campaigns in the Caucasus. They didn't do great, but they held their own, certainly. Not only that, but they conquered Siberia as well. In the early 20th century, though, a lot of things in a lot of places were going topsy-turvy. Following the Balkans, the Finns also had sort of a revival of national identity. And to top it off, when World War I was going on, and when 2 revolutions in Moscow were going on, the Finns saw their opportunity. December 4th, 1918, this is the end of World War I. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. Fun piece of trivia, he is actually the first president to visit Europe during his time in office. Improved communication in the 20th century would make that more doable for presidents going forward. But on this day, Woodrow Wilson steps onto a boat going to Versailles, France. That is when the peace treaty to officially end the war would get signed. Earlier in this same year, he had given his 14-point speech to Congress talking about his plan for international peace. In that same speech, he had also proposed the League of Nations. He would advocate that more while he was in Europe. The League of Nations would ultimately get created, but funny enough, the U.S. president was the one who proposed it, and the U.S. Senate refused to ratify America's entrance into the League of Nations. This was on the grounds that people wanted the U.S. to remain an isolationist state. They feared we would get dragged into foreign conflicts against our will. Funny how that turned out. December 4th, 1919, this man is Nestor Makhno. And during the Ukrainian War for Independence in 1919, this guy led a movement. It was essentially an armed peasants' revolt with the goal of establishing anarchist communism in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine were neighbors to Russia, who were getting their feet back under them after the Bolshevik Revolution. And the Bolsheviks did not like the whole anarchist part of that anarchist communist thing. So this guy became the target of an assassination attempt by one Yevgeny Polonsky and a group of his co-conspirators. And on this day, December 4th, they would launch what would be known as the Polonsky Conspiracy, which would ultimately fail, and 5 of the plan's conspirators, including Polonsky, would be executed. December 4th, 1943, the Works Progress Administration, which had been in place for nearly a decade under FDR, is finally disbanded. This was something that was done with the goal of alleviating suffering in the Great Depression. The basic idea was, if there's not enough work, the government will make up jobs, pay people to do something, anything, I don't know, think of something. But in 1943, of course, well, it was almost like there was a war or something. Suddenly, almost everyone had something important to do. So the program was simply no longer needed. Now, I greatly disagree with the economic model. The government is paying people well and good, but the money has to come from somewhere. Either you tax people, or you print money and cause inflation. So, at best, this project with the goal of economic relief would just centralize the economy massively. However, I will give begrudging credit as someone who cares about history. I have read through numerous documents written by people for the Works Projects Administration, record-keeping projects, historical projects, etc. I do appreciate having those around. December 4th, 1943, this is in the midst of World War II. One Mr. Josip Tito declares the Democratic Federal Yugoslavia. This was effectively a government in exile because of the war. But Mr. Tito, you may have heard of him, would be a powerhouse of Yugoslav politics and would be the leader of the nation until his death all the way in 1980. That is quite a legacy, quite a hard act to follow. I've heard people say that he singularly held the Balkans together for that entire time, and shortly after he was gone, well, we have the term Balkanization for a reason. December 4th, 1945, President Truman, taking over from FDR, did what President Wilson could not, that is, get the U.S. Senate to agree to participate in some grand multinational organization. Because this is the day they voted overwhelmingly to allow the U.S. to join the United Nations. If you'll remember, World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and we had the League of Nations. That was supposed to be this big diplomatic body to end the need for armed conflict. Well, we see how well that turned out in the 1930s and 40s. But hey-ho, all the world leaders wanted to try that again. We must never forget the horrors of World War II. We must establish the United Nations. This will be the final diplomatic solution that will eliminate the need for all armed conflict. Ha 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 ha. At least the UN lasted longer than the League of Nations. December 4th, 1956, these four gentlemen, known as the $1 Million Quartet, that consists of Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash, four of the biggest names in music of all time. On this date, these four are in the same room for the first and last time in Sun Record Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. And what else are they doing? Recording music. December 4th, 1969, two members of the Black Panther Party, those were Fred Hampton in the picture here and Mark Clark, were shot and killed by Chicago police. 1969 was a famous year for protests in the U.S., and two Black Panthers being killed did not ease the tensions. Black Panthers themselves being black nationalist racial segregationists. Say that 5 times fast. December 4th, 1971, this is a picture of the Montreux Casino concert venue located in Switzerland. This is what the place looks like after it was rebuilt in 1975. They had to rebuild it because during a Frank Zappa concert on this date, a member of the audience brought a flare gun into the concert, proceeded to shoot the flare gun at the ceiling. It started a fire in the building and burned the place down. And that event, my friends, is what inspired the song Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. Smoke on the water. God bless rock and roll. December 4th, 1983. There is a minor kerfuffle between the United States and Syria, beginning when Syria shot down an F-14 fighter jet. In response, the U.S., President Reagan at the time, launches some military aircraft from the USS John F. Kennedy and the USS Independence. Their mission is to attack and destroy Syrian missile sites. In the course of this operation, some of the aircraft are shot down, including the one piloted by this guy. His name is Bobby Goodman. He is a good man. Haha, pun. He was captured alive by the Syrians, but they secured his release within the month. Some things in the Middle East never change. December 4th, 1992, Somali Civil War. This is the day that George H.W. Bush orders 28,000 U.S. troops into Somalia. This is the war that inspired the movie Black Hawk Down. December 4th, 1993, this is the date of death for Frank Zappa. He is known for his improv guitar work, known as one of the most talented guitarists of all time. His music is indeed some pretty good stuff, so give it a listen if you haven't already. December 4th, 1998, Unity, also known as Node 1. This is the second built segment of the International Space Station, also the first one built in the U.S. This one serves as essentially a hallway between the Russian and the American segments, and on that day, December 4th, it launched. It was coupled with the first segment on December 6th, 2 days later. December 4th, 2009, this is the date of death for Liam Clancy. He is the youngest member of the timeless music group, the Clancy Brothers, known for recording and singing a lot of Irish folk songs that, like I said, are timeless classics. And their legacy continues. One of the Clancy Brothers' sons is in another music group called the High Kings. They, too, record a lot of Irish folk music. December 4th, 2017, the Thomas Fire, a fire so big they gave it a name. This is known as the largest wildfire in California history. Large enough that you can see the smoke in this satellite image going across the ocean. California is known for frequent droughts and wildfire. Many people put that down to their forest maintenance policy. December 4th, 2021, Semeru. This is the highest mountain on the Indonesian island of Java. This is also an active volcano, and on this date, it did what it does. Volcano erupted, killing 68 people. December 4th, 2024, on this day, a famous killing occurred, one that is still big in current events. That is the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, was shot and killed in Manhattan by, well, for legal reasons, I need to say it's an unknown gunman, but allegedly by Luigi Mangione. He was on the run after this for, I believe, more than a week, until he was finally arrested when a McDonald's employee recognized him and called the police. This guy became somewhat of a folk hero. People online have taken to calling him Player 2 after Luigi, the Mario character. And he has a fan base of young females who want to bear his children. I am not joking. Whether or not this killing was actually justified, there is a legitimate grievance here by pretty much all everyday working Americans. The cost for health insurance, any health insurance, is getting higher and higher. It is too high. The coverage is too low. My own take, I do not think the system in its current form can be improved enough to make it manageable. I think we need to radically overhaul the way we do healthcare in the US.